go to 34. We're moving along. We're getting it done. Californian Ted Patrick, who nearly lost his son to the children of God, is now famous as a deprogrammer, someone who uses intensive tactics to break the hold of a cult on a recruit. He says that the main thrust of deprogramming is forcing people to think, to challenge them to answer questions for which they have not been programmed with an answer. The more frustrated they become because they've been taught there is an answer to all attacks, the more they are forced to open their minds. The point suddenly comes when they can see that what has happened to them and their minds start to function for themselves again. So, the point suddenly comes when they can see what has happened to them and their minds start to function for themselves again. Patrick admits to using shock tactics sometimes, such as cutting off a Hare Krishna member's sacred ponytail, but says that most stories of his practices are exaggerated out. It says that most stories of his practices are exaggerated out of all proportion that helps. People who are kidnapped from their cult and brought to him are terrified before he even starts on them. Fear of succumbing facilitates succumbing. Isn't it a shame that they have to use worse actions to counteract bad actions? It's weird. An ex-evangelical preacher called Marjorie Gortner told a salutary tale to the authors of Snapping, which goes far to confirm Zimbardo's statement that an illusion of invulnerability serves only to increase the ease with which one can be controlled. Gortner saw his role. Oh, his name's not Marjorie, his name is Marjo. Gortner saw his role as preacher as similar to that of a rock star. He would make a strong entrance, go through the old standard numbers, and build up to his hit song at the end, by the time his audience was in ecstasy. The people who are out there didn't see it as entertainment, although that is in fact the way it was. Now that he is no longer a preacher, Gortner spends much time trying to convey to the public the kinds of rhetorical techniques that are so commonly used to manipulate their thoughts and emotions. From Snapping. I lecture at about 20 colleges a year, and I do a faith-healing demonstration, but I always make them ask for it. I tell them that I don't believe in it, and that I use a lot of tricks, and the title of the lecture is Rhetoric and Charisma. So I've already given them the whole rap explaining how it's done, but they still want to see it. So I throw it all right back at them. I say, no, you don't really want to see it. And they say, oh, yes we do. We do. And I say, but you don't believe in it anyway, so I can't do it. And they say, we believe. So, after about 20 minutes of this, I ask for a volunteer. And if have a girl come up and I say, do you want to feel better? And I say, you're lying to me. You're just up here for a good time, and you want to press all these people, and you want to make an ass out of me and an ass out of this whole thing. So why don't you go back and sit down? I really get hard on her. And she says, no, I believe. And I keep going back and forth until she's almost in tears. Then, even though this is a college crowd, and I'm only doing it as a joke, I say my same old line. Die. Oops. I'm a bad Buddhist. Anyway, in the name of Jesus, and touch them on the head, and wham! They fall flat every time. Well, as Hoffer said, People so often ask to be deceived. Schill's analysis on the features common to to bad guy A and bad guy B regimes seems very largely to apply also to religious cults. Even grandiose ideas about power and belief in hostile conspiratorial forces are all there. The Maharishi sent transcendental meditation teams out to countries undergoing strife in order to create a calming influence on the atmosphere. EST established a hunger project to end world starvation. At the other end of the spectrum, the Hare Krishna group has collected together an arsenal for self-defense. Part of Moon's operation is the manufacture of rifles and ammunition, and Synanon, the cult which started as a social program to aid drug addicts, owns different types of guns and a vast amount of ammunition. Hey dudes, when she wrote this, Synanon hadn't done their Tokyo bombing yet. Their Tokyo train bomb they set off. But they were already well known cult in the mid-80s. That's pretty awesome. But cults don't have to be vast and internationally based to get drunk on power. As the story of a very different cult, the family, shows. The Manson family. In August 1969, 7 people died a gruesome death at the hands of members of Charles Manson's family. On Manson's instructions, Susan Atkins, Sadie, Patricia Crinwell, Katie, and Charles Tex Watson carried out the murder of Roman Polanski's wife, Sharon Tate, and 3 friends in their Los Angeles home, while a 4th family member, Linda Kasabian, stood guard outside. The victims suffered, between them 102 stab wounds, and pig written on the door of Sharon Tate's blood. You know, it's like the only gosh darn fact we know of this case. So often repeated. A visitor to the Polanski's caretaker, who got in the way, was shot 4 times and knifed. The next night, Rosemary and Lino LaBanca were the victims, stabbed to death and attacked with a carving fork after death. The word war was scratched onto Lino's cheeks, and the words death to pigs, helter skelter, and rise were scrawled on the walls in Lino's blood. The killers that time were Charles Tex Watson, Leslie Van Houten, and Katie. When Manson and his followers were finally brought to trial, the Manson women who had not been involved kept vigil outside the courthouse. When Manson carved an X on his forehead, all his women followed suit. If he yelled out in court, the 3 women defendants got up and did likewise. It became clear that Manson had immense power over the women associated with him. Vincent Belagosi, the prosecutor, who later wrote the book of the case Helter Skelter with Kurt Gentry, commented on the Manson women. There was a little girl quality to them, as if they hadn't aged, but had been retarded at a certain stage in their childhood. Each was in her own way a pretty girl, but there was a sameness about them that was much stronger than their individuality. Same expressions, same patterned responses, same tone of voice, same lack of distinct personality. The realization comes with a shock. They reminded me less of human beings than of Barbie dolls. The issue became that had these girls been brainwashed? If so, they couldn't be held responsible for their conduct. Belagosi, or Bugalosi, wanted convictions. Therefore, it was up to him to show that the girls were responsible for their actions, however puppet-like they may have appeared. But The evidence that came out at trial showed that Manson used power techniques with his family members which by now should be all too familiar as effective coercive methods. The word brainwashing left aside, it is worth reviewing Manson's tactics. Charles Manson had a loveless youth and spent most of his life in institutions, including prison, until he was 32, and had by this time developed an interest in hypnosis, Scientology, the occult, and kindred subjects, about which he read extensively. He went to San Francisco in the height of the flower power, and received lots and lots of it for the first time, and received love and lots of it for the first time in his whole life. But Manson couldn't just accept the love, he had to manipulate it. Very shortly he learned that women were mesmerized by him, and he set about creating a family over which he had total control. He convinced the family that there would be a world war between the blacks and the whites, and they had to take cover so that, when it was over, Manson could emerge as the leader of the world. And the war was known as Helter Skelter, and the brutal murders were an attempt to speed things up. They were supposed to be blamed on the Black Panthers. Pausing here for a moment to tell a story, small story. So my stepfather was likewise one of those wayward youth. He came from a very abusive home. So abusive, in fact, that when he was 14 years old, he had to have his face, had to have reconstructive surgery because of his father, over something as stupid as maybe not doing his chores, whatever strict they called it. So he got into music, and he was a big band person in the late 60s and early 70s. Big thing to do, hippie guy. And so he'd done his hitchhiking thing, and he tells the story that when he was in Texas, he was hitching a ride with a caravan of cars, and one of the cars picked him up. He gave him a ride, and all they could talk about was their friend Charlie. They talked about their cult leader. He caught a ride with the Manson family. They must have been on their way to California. I mean, it's just weird. The girls who were drawn into the Manson family had all had an insecure background. Either they had not got on with their parents, or they had rejected parental values and were drifting alone to restlessness in the world. Sheffield and Upton described the initiation process to the family, into the family in The Mind Manipulators. Each woman had a very long initial sexual encounter with Mason. It was not really the sex that was important. Most, or who's talking here? Sheffield and Upton? Well, I don't know what they sound like. But it was not really the sex that was important. Most of these women were hardened sexual veterans. It was the words before and during the sex that mattered. With Susan Atkins, Manson had her pretend he was her father. If a woman was plain, he might tell her she was beautiful. If she were looking for a godlike figure, he might imply he was Jesus Christ. The crucial thing was that the women had to make a quick and clean break with her past, and this could most easily done by focusing in on the most severe problem associated with her past and seemingly eliminating it. What Mason did was really to enhance the problem and to continually use it afterward as a method of adhesion. In other words, he probed until he found the source of each girl's deepest fears, and played on it. Mason also encouraged the familiar no thought policy. He made all the decisions, even as to when people would eat and have sex and sleep. What people did between times was up to Manson to decide. He encouraged the use of drugs, saying, "When you take LSD enough times, you reach a state of nothing, of no thought." Manson had read much about hypnotism, and many family members concluded that he hypnotized them. Certainly, he could make the most eye contact and the power, or he would make the most of eye contact and the power of soft, monotonous tones to soothe people into suggestible states. Shepton and Opton quote one ex-male member who said, "He would talk to you in a soft, soothing voice, like someone lulling you to sleep, even though he'd later suggest things that would seem impossible, that you could not stop yourself, even if you were in a straight world, from going out and doing it." Could not stop yourself, even if you were in a straight world, from going out and doing it. Every day, at every meal, Manson would reiterate his philosophies of life, indoctrination by the time-tested means of repetition. He knew well that as they lived in seclusion, as a family, his followers would receive no counter-information of any kind to conflict with the contents of his own. He said it himself. They may not believe it 100%, but they can still draw opinions from it, especially if they have no other information to draw their opinions from. Just as in the American naval program to desensitize men to violence, from Chapter 4, Manson accustomed his members to brutality by making them participate in bloody rites and in showing films of the events. A couple of men testified that they had seen films of family members wielding knives and pretending to attack each other, or films of a dog being sacrificed and its blood drunk, while stirring up deep-buried fears, exasperating them with drugs, driving his followers to experience their deepest despair and uncertainty, all in the name of building their identities anew. Manson remained the friend, the source of comfort they could turn to, the one who understood. He was the one fixed point in a shifting world. But Manson wasn't always love, even to his women. He beat them. He threatened them. He kept them in a state of fear, which itself had a holding power. Believing as they did in helter-skelter, there was nowhere else for them to go for safety. Fear for their own future was Manson's ultimate weapon, much like real life. It must be pointed out that the authors of The Mind Manipulators reject the idea that the Manson women were brainwashed, or that the Mooney converts were either. They maintain that charisma was the power element involved, and that charismatic cults act as substitute families. It is no coincidence that charismatic cults so often refer to themselves as families. It is one of their main attractions. Where else in our society can a reluctant adolescent or post-adolescent put aside the anxieties of adulthood, regress into the total security of prepubescent childhood, and be so flattered as he is wise beyond his years, and be so flattered that he is wise beyond his years? Remember that I noted to remind us to remember the argument from earlier in the book, fear of living. When one sees the cult members accept stultifying, stultifying? I've never heard of this word. Stifling, I could understand. So, when one sees cult members accept stifling group pressures and demanding discipline, it is tempting to suppose that they must have been brainwashed. But children, even terribly abused children, usually cling to their families, come what may. We suggest that the same dynamics hold devotees to their religious masters. But here again, we are perhaps arguing semantics. By their own description of events in the Manson case, Shevlin and Ogden show that the family girls were subjected to considerable pressure, tailor-made to hit target, their most vulnerable inner selves. Whenever they were coerced into belief or willingly abdicated the responsibility for thinking in outcome, they became subservient to Manson's will. They were victims of their own human need for affection, warmth, security, their human failings of guilt and fear, and yearning for certainty in an uncertain world. Alright, stopping here, starting up after work with Patty Hearst.